Hi everyone, welcome to the next episode of Bones and Stones. Today we've got Grant Hall with us. Grant Hall's from the Stable Isotope Lab at the University of Pretoria, which is in the Mammal Research Institute. And he is very involved in archaeology. He is an archaeologist. Him and I have a nice overlap actually in terms of where we did a lot of work in the eastern part of Botswana, a place we're both very passionate about. Thanks for joining us, Grant. We really appreciate you taking the time to spend a few minutes talking about what you do.
Great. No, thanks, Tim. Good to catch up a little bit, even though it's by electronic ways and things like that. But yeah, I suppose you just want a little bit of a background.
Yeah, please. Thanks.
Into where I am. As Tim mentioned, I am an archaeologist. Originally from UCT, did my undergrad and master's there. And that's where I actually started getting into.
How do we end this conversation? Where's the? I'm joking.
Yeah, what UCT? Sorry. Yeah, so I did a whole lot of work there. Got into sort of archaeometry, so to speak, which is more the science-based side of things. Did a bit of work with Andy Sillen on heavy stable isotopes in the cradle of humankind, then decided to take a hiatus for 7 years and decided to come back to WITS to start studying again. And that's how I ended up getting involved with the Stable Isotope Lab at the CSR with Stefan Woodbourne. And so I did all my lab work there for my PhD, which was involved looking at carbon isotopes in charcoal from Cebudu as a means of paleo-environmental reconstruction. And from there got employed at the lab, and we started diversifying. The interesting thing is most of the isotope facilities in South Africa have an archaeological background to them. So there's obviously the UCT lab, then there's now our lab, and the Atemba facility also with Stefan is got an archaeological connection. Yeah, so I ended up, was it 2013, got transferred to the University of Pretoria and started establishing the lab. Yep. When I chat to archaeologists and they say, well, I say I'm working in the Mammal Research Institute, they're like, what? I was like, nope, this is actually a good spot to be. I mean, isotope ecology is actually a really multidisciplinary thing, and probably the best spot to use it is in archaeology, because archaeology is so multidisciplinary as well. So I tell the zoologists and the botanists, like, you guys are doing the groundwork for the archaeologists. So they sometimes they don't take that too well sometimes.
Yeah, sure, but keep giving it though.
Yeah,
in terms of the multidisciplinary approach and the different things you can do, could you unpack that slightly just to sort of make people aware of the kinds of overlaps you have with archaeology?
Sure. Well, when I sort of discuss the different types of projects that we do in the lab and the types of analysis, people, sometimes think they're not believing me as to how diverse the applications are. So what we do everything from dietary studies looking at aquatic ecosystems and how they function, terrestrial ecosystems, how they function. A very important thing that we've been doing for many, many years is our paleo-environmental work. So understanding how we can get information about past climates and environments. And that has a diverse application, not only for the zoologists and plant people, but for archaeologists, because one of the most important things is trying to understand what were conditions like at certain times in the past, and how did people react to them, what did they do to cope with either good climates or bad climates, and how we can pick that up in the archaeological record. So the kind of data and evidence that we can provide adds to the bigger picture. I always tell my students and people that contact me, you've got to use it's got to be a big picture thing. Yeah. You can't just rely on one set of data. So you can't just rely on the isotopes. You have to link it in with something else.
Okay, cool. So then I know one of the studies that you've been involved in, and you may have to correct me on some of the details here as well, is the chronology of baobabs and using baobabs to reconstruct paleoclimatic conditions in parts of South Africa. Can you chat a little bit about that? Because that's such an interesting study, and it was quite, it was very new and revolutionary, if I'm correct, when you guys first did it.
Yeah, well, it actually had a sort of origins when I was doing my PhD, because I had to do not only just do some work on charcoals, I had to do some work on tree rings.
Okay.
And so I did a series of modern trees from KwaZulu-Natal, including some yellowwoods. And we started getting some good data out of these trees. The problem was there wasn't a lot of work that had been done in southern Africa because of the difficulty of working with our trees, because most of them are either subtropical, so tree rings and the formation and stuff is a little bit difficult to work with as compared to the northern hemisphere. But eventually what happened was we got contacted by some colleagues of ours from Kruger, and they said a big baobab had fallen up in the Pafuri region, and would we be interested in doing something with it? So Stefan Woodbourne, who was my supervisor at the time, my boss and my colleague, went herring off there, collected some samples, brought it back to the lab, and at that stage we were still at the CSR, and the nice thing there was we could do our own radiocarbon dating, as well as start looking at the tree rings, or the growth rings rather. Baobabs are a little bit different to sort of your regular trees.
Yeah.
In the way they form their rings. And so we started doing that. We started getting some really interesting results from these things, and started expanding. I think that was about 12 years ago, 13 years ago that we started on that project.
Okay.
It resulted in us doing this sort of Southern Africa-wide transect where we started doing multiple baobabs from multiple areas, including southwestern Madagascar.
Oh, wow.
And we started including other tree species as well, because obviously baobabs have a limited distribution in southern Africa. We're at the sort of southernmost end of their distribution. So we were looking at yellowwoods, we looked at Acacia areoloba, or Valcheria areoloba now, as we have to call it.
Yeah.
And ended up sampling across northern Namibia down to southern Namibia, right across Botswana. We got some data from some other colleagues that had been working on trees in Zimbabwe, and then obviously from South Africa, from the Kruger, from Mapungubwe National Park, KZN, and then, as I say, we've got the stuff that we got in Madagascar.
Okay.
Just to give you an idea, can do a quick show and tell. This is what a tree ring record looks like. If you guys can see that.
Yeah.
Okay. This is from a very famous yellowwood from Karkloof.
Yeah.
And the initial work done on this tree was published in 1976 by Hall, no relation.
Okay.
It was trying to relate growth ring widths to climate. We've now redone it, and we've got a carbon isotope record for it, and an additional, I think, 25 to 30 dates. So we know the chronology of this tree really well.
Okay.
And
Cool.
the nifty thing about this is we've managed to pick up all kinds of and tie it in with various historical events. One of them, coolest one being the start of the Mfukani.
Oh, cool.
So I think it was 1815, 1816. There's a series of protracted droughts, and we can pick that up in the rings of this very tree.
That's really
so that's the nice one of the ways you can actually relate this kind of stuff to the archaeological record and tie it in with other sets of data.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Grant, if I could maybe jump in there with a question. Thanks very much. That's it's amazing to actually see it. But just to ask a question about the scales of analysis, you mentioned a little bit earlier about how informative your work can be from a paleoenvironmental perspective, and geoarchaeology or geoarchaeological research is something that I'm very passionate about. I know Tim and Kara, their eyes just glaze over the minute I start talking about geoarchaeology. Anyways,
right.
Obviously a lot of what you do feeds into that, especially from a paleoenvironmental perspective. And what's interesting for me are the different scales of analysis. What are the different types of resolution that you get depending on the different types of data that you're working with? Like the tree ring now you mentioned, you were able to link that to a historic event. I mean, that's really great resolution, but I'm guessing some of your paleoenvironmental data is looking at much broader periods.
Yeah. So in the case of the trees, working with Stefan Woodbourne at Utemba Labs with the new AMS dating facility, we can select particular rings and date them with a very high degree of accuracy. So we can get down to, plus minus of almost a year or two maximum with the tree rings. So that makes tree ring records very powerful up until a point. So the furthest we can go back with the tree ring record that we've developed for Southern Africa is around about 1,000 years, which is still quite significant. But speaking geologically, that's like a drop in the ocean. Yeah. Obviously, the further back in time you go, the bigger your dating errors are, and that's very important. In order for all this stuff to work and all these lines of evidence to work, you need good dates to tie all the bits and pieces together. Some of the other work we're doing with things like this little guy over here, this is a freshwater mussel I think this is from Mapungubwe, I'm not too sure, but one of my students is working on that. And we were able to get a environmental record from this, but we're reliant on the dates from the layer from which this was excavated. But the actual time frame represented in the mussel, it's a bit difficult to determine, what each ring represents. Is it a year, is it a month, or is it a week? Okay. It depends on your type of sample that you're working on. So, and then similarly, here's another item. This is a tooth. You can see, if you look closely over here, you can see there's a series of little drillings that have been taken out. Yeah. It's another one of the UP students. What we're doing there is we're looking at oxygen and carbon isotopes, and what you get from the tooth enamel here is a response of the animal to environmental conditions, so predominantly rainfall and a bit of temperature. Okay. But, it also depends on the types of questions that you're trying to ask. A lot of the work we're doing at the moment is environmental and climate related, but we do have some other stuff that I can tell you a little bit about now.
So if there's people, students and professionals or grads, anything like that, who would like to come and do some work with you or are wondering about the range of studies that can do in collaboration with you, what are the kind of things they can approach you with? I know we've had students come with soil samples that you've worked on with them, looking at carbon and nitrogen. So what's the kind of stuff that students and scholars and professionals can approach you with?
Look, the lab is hectically busy. We do a lot of work because there are only a few of the facilities in South Africa. You sometimes get a little bit overwhelmed. But like projects, we've got details on our website, but if you look under the Mammal, the University of Pretoria Mammal Research Institute, there's a link to the Isotope lab there, and also through the general UP website. So people can contact me and, say, look, we're interested in doing such and such, can you help? I would be happy to advise. I might not necessarily be able to do everything for everyone. But if students come up or researchers come up with some cool projects, I'm not necessarily going to say no, but I might not necessarily always say yes. Yeah. Or there might be some sort of addendums that you need to put in place or think about things a little bit differently. Okay.
Yeah. Lots. I see you've got another question.
Yeah, sorry, it's less of a question, more of an observation, Grant. I was having a look at your Google Scholar profile, and I see that you've got a paper on otter diets in trout-stocked dams in Mpumalanga. So I just wanted to let you know that Tim and myself are more than happy to conduct any kind of trout-related fieldwork, specifically with a flower rod. So if there's any kind of fieldwork that needs to be done once lockdown is over, just give us a call, please.
Yeah, but absolutely. I should add to this, Grant, because if you want actual trout to be brought out of the water, maybe revise your decision to invite Matt, because based on our recent fishing trip, there was, let's just say he wet the line regularly, but not much came out with it.
Yeah, unfortunately, I wasn't able to go on that one. That was one of the MRI's students that got to go out on field trip. Unfortunately, now, because I'm sort of Charles in charge of a lab, I don't get to go and play in the field that often anymore. Although I must admit, we did some cool fishing work in the Kruger a couple of years ago. That's where I caught my first tigerfish.
Oh, nice. Oh, wow.
At the Elephant River Gorge in the middle of nowhere. It was brilliant.
Yeah, that's... Wow. Well, yeah, definitely. If you need help with those kind of things, we'll be more than happy to assist.
You're gonna have to take a number because everyone wants to come.
Yeah, we often contract people to reduce numbers of people ahead of us. They do things to people's kneecaps that are. We won't get into that. Yeah.
No, absolutely not.
No, we'll definitely take a number. Well, Grant, I think. Awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so it's not paleo environmental related, but it's actually a kind of cool project. And it came about a couple of years ago, and it was a nice collaboration between the Isotope lab, Kerry Astley and her excavation work in Botswana, and then we tied it in with work with Fraser McNeill with a bit of anthropology. And we started looking at, so this is actually a modern pot that got thrown away, made by a vendor potter, and she actually still used this pot for cooking. So one of the things we wanted to do was have a look at the residues or what gets soaked up by the pottery and try and figure out what's going on in people's pots. So we did some work with Kerry on some archaeological stuff, and we actually picked up some very key differences between what was being prepared and what was being cooked in these different pots. And then we decided we needed to do some experimental work. So we went off with Fraser and Kerry to Bendamatali up near the Kafuri Gate and spent a couple of days there interviewing local people who were still using, local women that were still using traditional clay pots to cook. Wow. And figuring out what they're doing. So that's, that was a nifty sort of using, sort of modern technologies and, interviews, etc., to try and understand what's going on with, Iron Age cooking methods, etc. I know at one stage, I don't know if you're still keen, trying to work out, ancient beer recipes and things like that.
Yeah, that'd be a lot of fun to work out like the Mapungubwe period beer recipes and then, drink like the kingdom did. Yeah.
Exactly.
Grant, thanks very much. I think we're sort of running out of time here, but it's been really interesting. It's fascinating to hear about, all the sort of multidisciplinary work that you do through your lab and how it keys in with different archaeological studies and complements the work that we try and do as well. So thanks for joining us. It's been fascinating. Hopefully we can have you on again. Hopefully we can do some fishing for you, purely for science in the future.
Yeah, no, totally.
But thanks very much.
One thing I just want to, just before we go off, as I said, the one thing, sometimes it puts people off that not necessarily coming in from a sort of a BSc or a science background. Don't worry, we will teach you. We'll give you all the information you need. So, don't get put off by the science, so to speak.
Yeah, and it's because it's the little bit of collaboration that we have done through one of the students a few years ago. It's very reachable for people in their studies. It's inexpensive. A lot of the work that you guys do, it's easy enough to achieve. It's something that you work collaboratively, and I know you helped us through that quite nicely as well. So it's certainly something that people can do.
Absolutely.
Sort of keep in mind for projects. Yeah. Great. Well, thanks, Grant. Hopefully we can see you soon on campus maybe and go and get a beer. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Cool.